Pharaohs, rulers of ancient Egypt, and one of them has long been forgotten. His tomb holds countless secrets. Tutankhamun.
The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb unleashed the curse.
After the tomb was opened, 17 people who are either directly or indirectly involved die. Has a deadly curse been placed upon this grave? What is behind these mysterious deaths?
We give curses such great power simply because we cannot control them.
Are all these incidents linked to something that happened more than 3,000 years ago? Does the mummy provide any clues?
Howard Carter cut off its entire head, damaging it in the process.
The curse of the Pharaoh. Can this be backed up by science? The great myths of mankind. Mysteries passed on over thousands of years. Inexplicable events, places shrouded in legend, and superhuman heroes. Even scientists are fascinated. Is there any truth to these ancient legends? Researchers across the globe are working hard to solve the greatest mysteries of our time. Egypt, the oldest advanced civilization in history. Superpower of the ancient world. Powerful pharaohs ruled the country for over 3,000 years. Feared by their enemies and worshipped as gods by their loyal subjects. All trying to expand their power while also solidifying their legacy for future generations. The key to making their mark on history. Unique structures like temples, tombs, and the pyramids. Structures made to immortalize the pharaohs, shrouded in mystery to this very day. Thebes in southern Egypt, home to the Valley of the Kings. Unlike the famous pyramids, the tombs in this region remain hidden at first glance. The idea is to make it harder for tomb raiders to find the treasures. Ali Reda is Inspector of Antiquities of Upper Egypt. He knows everything about all the tombs and their stories.
What makes the Valley of the Kings special is that it's an arid region. Everything the ancient Egyptians placed in their tombs was able to stay intact and in good shape.
In 1922, the valley is the scene of a global sensation. Archaeologist Howard Carter conducts large excavation works. He wants to find treasures, gold, grave offerings, mummies. 10 years on, his financier, Lord Carnarvon, no longer believes that anything great will be found and signals his desire to cut off funding. Carter convinces him to give him one last chance. The explorer sets off on his last dig in the Valley of the Kings, and he's lucky. One of his workers comes across a secret opening with a stairway. On November the 4th, 1922, Carter sends a telegram to England. At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, stop. A magnificent tomb with seals intact, stop. Recovered same for your arrival, stop. Carter. 2 weeks later, Lord Carnarvon travels to the Valley of the Kings. It would be his last journey. On this occasion, the men find Tutankhamun's tomb by pure chance.
Other tombs were actually built over the top of Tutankhamun's tomb, and the rubble from that construction fell down in front of the entrance, which means that his grave was perfectly preserved and perfectly hidden until Carter came along and created a real Egyptian hype with his discovery.
Howard Carter breaks open the first door and lets Lord Carnarvon go first. The men have to clear the way leading down an 8-meter-long hallway.
The find was such a big sensation because the grave was untouched, and that was very rare indeed. Most Egyptian graves had long been robbed by grave robbers, but this one was absolutely perfect, and it created a wave of interest in all things Egyptian.
The news about the untouched tomb belonging to a pharaoh makes international headlines.
Egyptomania swept the globe in the 1920s. In particular, the nobility liked to collect Egyptian treasures and have Egyptian-themed parties where they would wear extravagant tunics and be fanned with palm fronds. And at the end of the party, they would unwrap a mummy.
Since the beginning of the 19th century, mummies were unwrapped for fun and sometimes ground for their questionable medicinal properties. The Egyptian theme is picked up in theatres, literature and cinemas. Howard Carter's spectacular find adds to the hysteria. Films often feature tombs, living mummies, explorers and purported curses. In the Valley of the Kings, Carter uncovers hieroglyphs revealing the name of the deceased. Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Up until then, he was just a completely anonymous Egyptian king. The objects Lord Carnarvon and Howard Carter find behind a stone wall exceed all expectations. Treasures, gold, furniture, grave offerings, all piled on top of each other in a seemingly careless heap. Pots full of food, chariots, god figurines. Carnarvon and Carter are looking at one of the greatest archaeological finds ever. But soon, inexplicable events start to unfold. With every piece they take out of the pharaoh's vault, the ire of the Golden King seems to grow. A first casualty sends shockwaves through the excavation team. Lord Carnarvon, the financier, dies. His son, the 6th Earl of Carnarvon, recalls the strange events of the night of his father's death.
All the lights went out in the hotel. I didn't know they'd all gone out all over Cairo, but they did, in point of fact. Every light went out.
Was the Lord sentenced to death because he entered the pharaoh's tomb first?
Some people thought he died of the curse, didn't they?
Well, I can tell you a great deal about that, as I was there at the time. He happened to be bitten by a mosquito. And what did he do? Cut the pimple off his face in the night or in the morning when he shaved. And he said at lunch, "I feel awful."
Supposedly, at the very hour of Carnarvon's death, his dog Susie dropped dead in faraway England.
After the death of Lord Carnarvon, the story of the Pharaoh's curse really gained international momentum, also because of various other bizarre events associated with it, the death of his dog, and also the power cut at the time of his death. But at the time, power cuts really were very common in Cairo, and it did have nothing to do with his death.
Yet another sensation making global headlines. First, the discovery of the tomb. And now, the deadly curse of the pharaoh.
The curse gave the press a juicy story. It led to serious mystery, which excited not just the journalists, but their audiences. Now, if you want a story to be well known, make it a secret.
17 people die, allegedly from the curse of the pharaoh. Among the dead include X-ray expert Archibald Douglas Reed, Lord Carnarvon's half-brother Aubrey Herbert, Arthur Mace, Carter's right hand, Lady Almina, Carnarvon's wife, and Prince Ali Fahmy Bey, who claims to be a descendant of Tutankhamun. Is the tomb really the cause of all these deaths? Ali Reda, Inspector of Antiquities of Upper Egypt, enters KV 62. That's the official name of the legendary vault. The treasures have been removed from the tomb, but the original mummy of King Tutankhamun is on display. Does the ancient corpse have sinister powers that haunt us in the present?
The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb unleashed the curse. The facts surrounding the tomb are somewhat obscure. The young king was very mysterious. He took the throne when he was 8 or 9 years old and died at 18 or 19. A child, really.
Who was this mysterious pharaoh? Why do people live in fear of his curse to this day? Young Tutankhamun grew up in the royal palace. He was the son of Akhenaten, a revolutionary pharaoh. When Akhenaten ascended to the throne, he ordered all temples to be closed and banned the old gods. The people were only allowed to worship the sun. He and his spouse, the beautiful Nefertiti, were also to be treated like gods. After Akhenaten's death, his young son Tutankhamun succeeded him. 10 years later, he too died.
Tutankhamun completely disappeared from the history books after his death. So without finding his tomb, we'd probably still not know about this pharaoh to this very day.
This is what makes Carter's excavation so spectacular. His team uncovers almost 6,000 objects in the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, a king previously unknown to the modern world. Gold, furniture, everyday objects, all helping to expand our knowledge about the ancient Egyptians.
The Egyptians believed that life did not end with death. In fact, that a better life followed, which is why Egyptians were buried with everything that they could possibly need, with drinks, with food, with games, with furniture, even with servants.
The world is amazed by the splendor of the pharaoh's tomb. Carter empties the grave. Meanwhile, a growing number of people close to him die. Is the pharaoh taking revenge for the desecration of his grave? Excavations are still being carried out in the Valley of the Kings to this day. Just 200 meters away from Tutankhamun's tomb, a Dutch team is examining layers of rock. Egyptologist Carina van den Hoven is heading the mission. She and her team recently found this skull. Time and again, the rocks reveal human remains. Van den Hoven hopes to learn more about the tomb and those who are buried there. The mysterious deaths that occurred following Carter's excavation don't bother her.
People sometimes ask me about the curse of the pharaoh, and if those working with these human remains could be haunted by the curse. But I think the man buried here would be quite pleased if he knew what we were doing in this tomb.
Still, the alleged curse of the pharaoh continues to strike fear into the hearts of many.
We give curses such great power simply because we cannot control them. They can introduce such uncertainty and devastation into our lives that we cannot control, but we want to try and protect ourselves from that. In particular, the idea that someone can actually impact our lives in a negative sense from beyond the grave is disturbing.
Carter is unfazed by the headlines about the curse. He wants to get a hold of the last and greatest treasure, the pharaoh's mummy. And so he sets out to access the coffin's secret chamber, knocking down ancient walls in his path. At long last, he arrives. He finds himself in a small room with murals. Carter has reached his goal. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Objects of great value taken from Tutankhamun's tomb have found a new home here, including these large wooden shrines.
This shrine was located within the 3 other shrines behind a wall in the tomb. Inside, they found 4 sarcophagi placed one inside the other, just like the Russian Matryoshka dolls, where the dolls are placed one inside another. The same principle was applied here. 4 large rooms, one built into the next, home to those 4 sarcophagi. The last one contained the 4 coffins and was in the shrine back there. Come on, I'll show you. This shrine was inside this one, which was inside that one. And this last shrine is the largest. It contained all the others.
Attila, king of the Huns, is said to have been buried in 3 coffins, the outer one made of iron, the next made of silver, and the last one gold. Napoleon, whose Egyptian expedition paved the way that led to the deciphering of the hieroglyphs, is buried in 4 coffins.
Why 4 shrines and 4 coffins? According to ancient Egyptian teachings, 4 pillars held up the firmament. Burying the king between 4 pillars meant that his body would contain the 4 corners of the universe, over which he'd rule from the afterlife.
For Howard Carter, the days following the opening of the final chamber are agonizingly long. The wooden shrines need to be disassembled and removed from the site. Rumor has it that Carter's actions only served to strengthen the curse's grip. Did ancient Egyptians really put a curse on their tombs? One trace leads us to the Egyptian Museum in Berlin. Here, thousands of texts bear witness to the mysterious knowledge of times long past. Egyptologist Verena Lepper is researching the curses from the time of the pharaohs.
Magic played a prominent role in ancient Egyptian religious tradition. They believed in higher beings, in a higher power, which is why they worshipped nature.
Magic and spells were an integral part of ancient Egyptian life. It was also popular to make predictions about the future. Many of the spells were meant to help their love lives. Others, however, were intended to hurt or kill their enemies.
This one is about punishing an unfaithful wife. They threw a waxed crocodile into some water, and the crocodile came to life. It turned into a large real crocodile that snatched the adulterer as a punishment.
There's magic for every sphere of life and every budget. Professional magicians and priests offer it as a service. Even graves are cursed. Grave robbers beware. If they continue, they will die an agonizing death.
The ancient Egyptians would write spells on pottery or pieces of it. And then they destroyed them, threw them onto the ground, releasing the spell.
Did Howard Carter destroy such a piece of pottery when he entered the tomb, essentially pulling the trigger on the cursor without ever realizing it? A pottery tablet engraved with the words, "Death shall come on swift wings to him that touched the tomb of the Pharaoh," was reportedly found inside the tomb, but it has since disappeared, never to be found again. More than 3,300 years after the Pharaoh died, Carter and his crew made their way to Tutankhamun's tomb. It was the beginning of a mysterious series of deaths. Why did they not listen to the warnings about the curse?
The tomb is surrounded by 4 patron goddesses. They are said to protect the coffin and the mummy of King Tutankhamun to this day.
All treasures have been retrieved from the grave and are now in museums and private collections across the world. Only the massive stone sarcophagus is still exactly where it was placed.
There was a general warning regarding all tombs in the Valley of Kings. All those who get near them will be punished.
To the pharaohs, tomb raiders presented the greatest threat to their eternal life in the afterworld. Is that why they cursed their graves? In the tomb of Ramses VI, the warning to the tomb robbers is very clear.
Decapitated people bound at their hands behind their back. That's a warning. Anyone who dare enter the king's burial chamber will have their head cut off and will be bound from behind. They will have to spend the rest of their lives that way.
We know that all of the finds were meticulously recorded and photographed, and there's no mention of it in Howard Carter's notes. However, there's every chance it was actually not spoken of for fear of arousing superstition from the local workers. And also, Carter was rumoured that he was embezzling finds, so perhaps he made that tablet disappear.
An ancient curse causing deaths in the 20th century? For decades, this mystery keeps scientists on their toes, until one day, disturbing reports from Krakow, Poland, make headlines. Events that bear striking resemblance to series of deaths in the Valley of the Kings. On Friday, the 13th of April, 1973, researchers opened the grave of King Casimir IV. Shortly thereafter, 5 of them die. Whispers about the curse of the king are quick to circulate. Wisław Barabasz was there in Krakow when the tomb was opened. The former microbiology professor, who was then a young research assistant, was allowed to assist in the exhumation of the king.
5 people died within 2 years. That's when the case took a really fascinating turn. People suddenly remembered all the warnings about opening tombs and letting the kings rest in peace.
Głosy, które mówiły, żeby nie otwierać żadnych grobów, zostawmy królów w spokoju.
Casimir IV ruled over Poland for 45 years in the 15th century. The economy and the culture of the country flourished. It was a golden era. To this day, Casimir is highly respected in Poland. But that's not why the opening of his tomb makes headlines. 10 of the workers and researchers involved die within years. A parallel to the curse of the Pharaoh? They die of heart attacks, strokes, and pneumonia. Could these causes all be linked to the grave that they opened in Krakow? Casimir's burial chamber had been sealed for centuries, just like the Pharaoh's tomb, and with equally dangerous consequences.
We grew the different bacteria and fungi in petri dishes. And then we saw it. Aspergillus flavus fungus. It turns out it's one of the most dangerous and toxic fungi.
If the spores of the toxic mycelium are inhaled, secretions and blood cells from the blood vessels enter the alveoli, leaving behind protein deposits. As a result, the oxygen intake capacity of the lungs is reduced. This can be life-threatening, especially for people with pre-existing conditions. The researchers in Krakow didn't wear protective masks inside the centuries-old tomb, which, unlike the Valley of the Kings, was quite humid. The perfect environment for the Aspergillus flavus fungus. Its spores kill the scientists. But could the highly toxic fungus also be behind the so-called curse of the Pharaoh? Lord Carnarvon was the first to enter the recently opened tomb of the Pharaoh and the first one who died. Protective gear like masks or gloves? None. To make matters worse, Carnarvon also suffered from lung problems. Eventually, researchers give the all clear. The Aspergillus mycelium cannot thrive in the dry Egyptian air. The Krakow lead is a dead end. The curse of the Pharaoh remains a mystery. The Zurich Institute of Evolutionary Medicine. Professor Rulli knows mummies have to be handled with much care. He's examined Tutankhamun various times. He's not too fond of Howard Carter.
When Howard Carter and his team discovered the grave in 1922 and examined the mummy in 1925, his team had little to no background in medicine. Evidently, the main focus was on the artifacts, and you can tell. They didn't handle the mummy the way we would today, from a medical perspective. I'm not judging. It was a different time, a different question, a different approach.
What did Howard Carter do to the mummy to get his hands on the gold? For days, his team was trying to open the huge stone sarcophagus. Inside, they found coffin after coffin after coffin, all tightly placed one in the other, with barely an inch of wiggle room. Carter needed to build special tools so they wouldn't destroy the wooden coffins or the intarsia. Eventually, they discovered the golden mask. Howard Carter is overwhelmed by what he's found and wants to present the golden mask as soon as possible. He desperately tries to lift the mummy from the sarcophagus, but due to the resin used to embalm the mummy, it sticks to the coffin. Carter ends up putting the wooden coffin in the blistering heat of the sun for 2 days. He hopes the resin will soften so he can finally be able to see the pharaoh's face.
Howard Carter cut off its entire head, damaging it in the process.
Howard Carter disassembles the mummy into individual parts. He thinks this is the best way to display the treasures. Only later does Carter realize that he has gone too far.
Some of the parts that were severed have been put back together, so the damage is only visible to a certain extent. They wanted to make it look like they left the body more or less intact to future generations.
Professor Rulli has not only examined Tutankhamun, but also Ötzi, the most famous and oldest natural mummy in the world. The Iceman was found in 1991 by mountaineers in an alpine glacier. His body has been mummified over thousands of years by the frigid temperatures and is amazingly well preserved. But once again, some of those involved in the excavation of Ötzi died within years. The case was soon labeled Ötzi's curse. And maybe the way the mummy was handled was the reason behind it once again. Like Tutankhamun, people touched and examined the mummy with their bare hands. The only difference, gold and treasures don't play a role in Ötzi's case. Researchers are only after the insights the mummy can provide. To better control these factors in the future, the Swiss researcher wants to examine mummies directly on site. Together with his colleague Patrick Eppenberger, Professor Rulli is currently working on a 3,000-year-old foot. It is crucial that their DNA not be mixed with the mummies. It can't be touched without gloves.
The special thing about this technique is that we have the option of using 3D imaging. We obtain an image that isn't like X-ray, but rather a CT, allowing us to view the object in 3D form.
Modern technology could have saved Tutankhamun's mummy a lot of trouble. But after more than 3,300 years, and despite state-of-the-art research methods, the mummy of the pharaoh still keeps its secret.
This machine is still a prototype. We developed it ourselves. It can be taken apart completely, and it actually fits into 2 small boxes, so it can be transported on an airplane. It allows us to examine the individual layers of a mummy's body parts very well.
Ötzi's cause of death is clear. It also reveals a lot of information about the life of Europe's most famous mummy.
From a medical perspective, we always try to make diagnoses when examining ancient Egyptian mummies. The same applies to mummies like Ötzi. We want to see if things have changed as a result of the different lifestyle we live today, or because of other pathogens. We are always trying to learn something about this dynamics and how we interact with our environment. Every mummy can contribute to this quest.
While Ötzi was murdered, the researchers and alpinists who died after his find were not cursed, but rather died of old age, had a lifestyle prone to risk, or pre-existing conditions.
We really want to understand this new knowledge that excavating the tomb can give us, but in our minds, even possibly unconsciously, we know that it is wrong to disturb the dead, to not respect them. And because of this, we're undergoing this ethical dilemma, which results in a curse.
Thus, the key to the Tutankhamun case does not lie in parallels to other famous cases. But what makes the pharaoh so unique? Does his short life hold any clues? Why did the Egyptian king die? Was he killed? X-rays from 1969 show splintered bones on the mummy's skull. Again, some are quick to bring up the curse of the pharaoh. The Valley of the Kings, 2005. Zahi Hawass was chief Egyptologist at the time and wanted to examine the pharaoh on site using state-of-the-art technology. The scientists don't believe in a curse and simply want to retrieve information from the mummy.
Today, a team of Egyptian archaeologists and technicians examined the mummy for the first time by CT scanning. And the purpose of this examination is really to look inside King Tut to find out the cause of his death.
Once more, the Golden King is not left to rest in peace. And once more, strange things start to happen. While examining the mummy, the technological equipment goes haywire. The computer starts malfunctioning. But eventually the scan works, and the researchers receive 1,700 images of the mummy. The verdict: Tutankhamun wasn't killed. But still, there's something odd about the mummy.
The most puzzling thing about Tutankhamun's body is that it appears burned. Now, that's a very strange thing to do to a body if you want it to last for centuries. But perhaps it was the natural result of the embalming process that the body went through.
In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were embalmed before the funeral in an elaborate process lasting up to 70 days. This was meant to make sure the soul would recognize the body in the other world. The body was thoroughly cleansed. The inner organs and the brain were removed. The body was covered in sodium bicarbonate, dehydrating it completely to prevent decomposition. Back in Zurich, at the Institute for Evolutionary Medicine, Professor Rulli is using animal organs to conduct research on historical mummification techniques.
The mummification process in ancient Egypt likely lasted several weeks. It's hard to reconstruct because we've only got limited knowledge about how the Egyptians carried out this sacred process. We are trying to simulate the process using substances similar to those available in Egypt at the time. We are using fresh pig organs from the slaughterhouse. We used them to reconstruct the different steps of the mummification process.
The art of mummification was only passed on orally, from father to son or from master to apprentice. Professor Rulli can only guess the exact details, but the researcher has an explanation as to why Tutankhamun's mummy is dark-colored.
Die Mumie von Tutanchamun scheint relativ dunkel.
Tutankhamun's mummy is quite dark, black tinted. Some think that the mummy also looks burnt, but I am rather skeptical about that. I think it has more to do with the fact that the embalming fluids had properties that caused the skin to change color.
Similar to the embalmed pig's liver that has almost turned black.
We are looking at a pig's liver which has already changed after several weeks. We first tried it in sodium bicarbonate, treated it in oils and beeswax, and at the end, we covered it with bitumen, the star-like substance. The liver has flattened, it's become thin, but it's got the typical look and texture of mummified organs that one could also find in an ancient Egyptian mummy.
At the end of the procedure, the mummified heart is placed back into the body. Usually. But Tutankhamun's heart is missing from his mummy. Why? Without a heart, the Egyptians believe a pharaoh cannot live on in the afterlife. Eternal life after death plays a pivotal role for ancient Egyptians. The soul has to live on, but certain steps need to be taken. And this is where magic comes into play once again, because the dead pharaoh has to face the judgment of the deceased.
In this scene of the Book of the Dead, the principles of justice and truth are weighed against the heart, the person's life achievements, so to speak. You can see the hieroglyph for the heart here. And this one is Ma'at, justice, truth. If they are unbalanced, the person is allowed to pass into the afterlife for eternity.
The heart mustn't lie.
The monster is this primordial creature, which will devour the deceased if the trial doesn't end with a ruling in their favor.
Is the heartless mummy cursed? Or did the sudden death, fast mummification, and hasty funeral lead to some embalming errors? It remains unclear when Tutankhamun's heart was lost. Based on their research, scientists agree that Tutankhamun died when he was 19 and apparently wasn't killed. So what did kill the pharaoh?
There are various theories saying he was run over by a chariot and got injured in the process. Based on current findings, however, I believe most of these injuries are unfortunately the result of handling that took place in the 1920s, but we are unable to prove that.
Many of the deaths in Carter's team are just as mysterious as the pharaoh's fate. Carter's assistant, Arthur Mace, dies at 53 for some inexplicable reason. Unlike Howard Carter, he's said to have believed in the curse of the pharaoh and even feared it. Can curses really bring about bad luck? At least to those who believe in them. Gurus Holst claims to be a magician. He is convinced about the power that thoughts have over the purely physical world. Holst wants to demonstrate this in an experiment.
A curse can also have a long-lasting effect if you design it that way. You also have to keep in mind that curses aren't just for the living, they also exist in the spiritual world where time ceases to exist as we know it. Personally, I would assume a curse could still be in place after 1,000 years, if that was how it was intended to be.
Gurus Holst sets the scene for a curse. He asks invisible forces for assistance. forces that exist only for those who believe in them.
I myself worship demons and underworld gods. They allow me to access my powers.
The magician wants to place a curse on the arrows of the archers. The aim of the experiment is to make the cursed arrows less accurate. Our three archers don't know what's coming. They are simply told to prepare and warm up as they would for a competition. While the magician's task is to curse the arrows to affect the archer's accuracy.
I will once again center the arrows using my energy, so they don't hit the target.
Magician Gurr's Holst tries to cast a spell on the arrows in order to alter the accuracy of our shooters. Nicole Engel is a psychologist and behavioral therapist. She is monitoring the experiment and gets a first impression of the participants' mental strength. Does the archer's psyche factor in once they learn about the cursed arrows?
At this distance, hitting the target with this equipment shouldn't be an issue.
It's going to be fun.
First, the participants shoot 3 regular arrows. This way can be determined how well the archers perform without pressure or competition stress.
If I have seen that a curse or magic has worked for someone, whether it's really true or not, it might be more likely that I'm experiencing a nocebo effect, meaning I believe that a curse or cursed arrows could negatively affect my performance.
Marek has a harder time than the others, even with arrows that haven't been cursed. Next, we start our experiment with the cursed arrows. The archers have only been informed that the arrows have been manipulated, and nothing more.
There you go. There you go.
Is there a noticeable difference?
I tried to see if they're heavier, and I checked the stiffness, but I don't notice any differences.
Does the alleged curse affect the accuracy of the archers? Does it really have an effect on the arrows? Or rather, on the confidence of the archers? Olympian athlete Alexander has full control over the cursed arrows. His performance is unaltered. He shoots accurately, as always.
It's a bit worse, but I would expect it to be in the range of variance that is typical for my shooting.
I had as many hits as in the first round. Of course, in my mind, I was like, what has changed? I don't know.
While Camillo thinks he feels something but still hits the target, Marek struggles more.
I didn't notice anything unusual or different about the arrows, so it was definitely more of a mental challenge for me. I noticed I got nervous. That affected my technique a bit.
Mindset or real magic? Did the curse work?
Two of the participants are able to control their mindsets rather well. One of the pros, the one who's also been to the Olympic Games, said, "Of course I thought about it," but still he managed to continue to shoot well. The other participant wasn't able to do that because he let it get into his head. Thoughts, feelings, and our physiology or physical reactions are always connected. If I can't get my thoughts under control, things don't seem to work the way they usually do.
This is known as the nocebo effect. Suggestion can affect our mind and body.
The nocebo effect is the bad big brother of the placebo effect. So where the placebo effect works by suggesting in your brain that there are positive outcomes to a particular sham treatment, and therefore you feel positive effects in your body or in your mind, the nocebo effect does the exact opposite. So by believing that you're going to have a negative outcome, that manifests itself in you.
Subconscious processes in our brain. The power of imagination.
It was a test, but I think I had some influence on the outcome. And please remember, I didn't want to harm them. If I had crammed in more, if I had placed a real curse on these arrows, it could have swept the guys off their feet, and it would have been irresponsible to send them out there. I only cursed the arrows, nothing more.
The effect is different for each archer. Those who believe in curses can feel the nocebo effect. To scientists, there is only facts. Also when it comes to the Pharaoh. DNA analysis and other examinations have shown the beautiful golden mask hides a deformed face, marked by disease. Tutankhamun's body shows clear signs of incest. The young Pharaoh was probably ill from birth. He had a club foot. This explains why there were about 130 canes in his tomb. He also had an acute case of malaria. His premature death might have been the result of disease, incest, and a potential accident. No murder took place. But what was behind all those deaths in Poland and after Ötz's discovery, or in the Valley of the Kings? It was no fungus, and it was no curse. These were explicable natural causes of death. Most of the deceased were old and had pre-existing conditions. But again, the power of suggestion plays a role. It was only after journalists linked the cases that the myth of the curse of the Pharaoh emerged. The Pharaoh died unexpectedly, so his funeral in the Valley of the Kings had to be organized in haste. The tomb required for his burial hadn't been made yet. So the young king had to make do with a tomb that didn't reflect his status. Usually, pharaohs had their tombs built while they were still alive. Today, science has shown that Egyptian graves were often used more than once. Dr. Carina van den Hoven and her team are currently looking into this topic in the Valley of the Kings.
This tomb was built for its owner in 1400 BC. His name was Djehuti, and he's depicted here alongside his mother. A couple of hundred years later, the tomb was used by another family member, who we can also see here.
Scientists will continue conducting research on this grave for many years. Whether their takeaways can be transferred to the young pharaoh Tutankhamun is impossible to tell. Even more so since scientists also have to go back and correct previous hypotheses.
We previously thought they reused the tombs out of convenience, for economic reasons, because it was cheaper to use someone else's tomb. But that's not true. Our research has shown the act of reusing a tomb meant so much more. The two deceased people had a lot in common. They were both called Djehuti. They had the same profession, managing the Karnak temple. That indicates that the tomb wasn't reused for practical purposes, but rather for deeper reasons. People were actually trying to reconnect with the past.
Tutankhamun was a modest pharaoh.
Tutankhamun's story is so fascinating to us for several reasons. Partly because he was such an incredibly young king who died at a very young age, but also because we are fascinated by Egyptian life, by this amazing civilization that existed thousands of years ago and has practically disappeared into the dust. We love to hear these magical stories of kings and their adventures, and associate that with the curse, and you have an amazing story to hand down the generations.
Tutankhamun's death marks the end of the 18th dynasty of pharaohs. New dynasties take over. The curse of the pharaoh remains a myth, a media phenomenon, a story that many just want to believe in. And yet, many mysteries about Tutankhamun himself remain. About his missing heart, or whether his unusual tomb can also be explained by the theory that he, like his father Akhenaten, was to be erased from the history of the Pharaonic Empire.